Now this is lecture 1-4. Now I've got an assumption that you've reviewed the first three lectures, 1-1, 1-2, and 1-3, prior to going through this video. Because some of the things that I'm going to discuss now come from those previous things that you've reviewed. Primarily, having installed Python or Anaconda. Now, as I noted in the welcome video, you've got different ways that you can access, use, and store your Jupyter Notebooks. And I'm going to go over some of these things now. Now, in lecture 1-3, you installed Anaconda. And here's Anaconda installed on my machine. And when we launch Jupyter Notebooks here, just click launch. When we do that, that will open up Jupyter Notebooks in a browser interface. So it'll have a path to your local drive and a repository where you decide where you want to store your files. Now that's something we need to take into consideration before we even create any files. Now, we could keep things on our local machine. We can keep things in Google Colab, and we can also keep things in Github. If you want to, you could keep files, your notebooks, copies of your notebooks in all three of those locations. That's if you want to. Now, the thing that you may run into problems with if you have files stored in multiple locations is keeping track of which one is the one that you're actually using, what your working file may be. Now, I want you to submit projects in Google Colab. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. So for now, let's look at the local machine, the local pathways. So this is Jupyter Notebooks that I've run off of an Anaconda environment. Now, as I said, we're looking at this in a browser interface, and I happen to be using Chrome as my browser for this video. And I can go spin up any one of these notebooks and interact with it in a browser interface. So let's go look at this Module 1 notebook. And we'll talk about some things that we can play with, what we can do. Now, I'm interacting with this in my browser interface, as I said. We've got, as you probably saw in the previous video, there's a Jupyter Notebook. We have markdown cells, the text cells. Here's one that has nothing in it yet. And now here, this third cell is programming in Python. Now, when we run these cells, they change. Here's what we see as I double click that first cell. Here's what we see, what I've typed. It's a heading 1 actually, because there's one pound symbol there. If I put 2, it'll change the size of it. And then I run that code, double click it, and we'll bring it back to a heading 1. Run it. So we can modify the text, and once it's been run, that's the display of what that markdown language will display as. Now, it uses what's called latex. It's the language or the syntax that's being used for the markdown language. And here we're going to use Python in this course. And you see here it's a Python 3 IPY kernel that we're running. IPY is the notebooks. That's Python being the language. And I'll have some links for you if you want to dig deeper into what Jupyter Notebooks are and how they're how they run. So I've got some Python language here, and if I want to run that code, let's see, I've declared a variable x, and I've stored a string in it called my name, and here's a function called print, and I want this computer through the web browser to execute this code. So I go ahead and run that code, execute it, and then it displays the output, my name. So it's saying print whatever is stored in X. What's in X is my name, so it printed it out. And we can go do whatever we want in other Python cells. Create another one. Say print Scott, run it, and it prints that string, what was in those quotation marks. So I'll have in the future notebooks, I'll have text. There'll be headings that you'll see. And it'll look a little different when we look at it in Colab. That's why I prefer to have you submit these things in Colab. And maybe work it with them in Colab rather than keep them local. But one of the things we need to make sure of is whatever we're doing, that we're saving our work as we go. This isn't like a Word document that auto saves for us like we want to. The last checkpoint on this was 9 minutes ago. Come back, save, create a checkpoint. Save, create a checkpoint. Make sure that these things are auto saving for you, that they're saving. Okay? So, with that said, that's the local version running off of Jupyter Notebooks from Anaconda. Now, programmers like to work in groups, share the load, collaborate on things. But to be able to collaborate on things, we need to have some web-based storage so people can access these resources remotely from anywhere in the world. The commonly used storage is GitHub or Git. It's at github.com, and you'll create an account in GitHub. It's something that you'll need if you're going to proceed in the computer science or technology field to store things that you may want to share with others. So what we're going to do in this course is you'll create your account. So here, Prof. Hammond is my account. And for my account, I've got repositories. And I click on my repositories, and I've got a few of them here. COP1000, COP5768, some calculus stuff, machine learning foundations, COP3530. Now, if we go into COP1000, I have a number of notebooks that I store in this repository. Think of a repository as like a folder. And in this folder, I have a number of notebooks. If you dig deeper into how GitHub works, you'll see that we have the ability to describe what this repository is and link to the files in it. And it makes it a little cleaner, more user-friendly if you are sharing these things out so others can access them. Now, mine's not published. It's not shared out. I don't need to have this accessible to everybody. This is what I've got that I use for you. And if we go look here, here's this file. You can see it. It's not a file that we would work with to go edit. It's just a place to store the file. Somebody can pull it down, work with it, upload the current version if I give them access. So think of GitHub as a place to store stuff. Now let's look at the next location that I've talked about. And that's Google Colabs. You could do a search for Colab, and it'll come up with Google Collaboratory. And when you go to it, you'll have to use your Google login to create an account with Colab, create a storage place, if you will, for Colab. And once you have a Colab storage area set up, or your way to go interact with Colab, see, my account is linked to what I'm looking at. We can go look at examples of Colabs. There's one that loads by default, which is Welcome to Colab. This is, in fact, a notebook. Recent ones that I've had running, well, that's Welcome to Collaboratory. I can store my stuff on Google Drive if I want, as opposed to GitHub. So I've got some things that I've got stored in Google Drive. I've got stuff in GitHub. And essentially, we just map to those locations. And then I can go access. Here's that COP1000 Module 1. Now, this is not the same one necessarily that we saw on my local machine. Because if you remember, the one that's here didn't have any Python programming in it. This one doesn't. It linked to it. Now, I don't want to open something that may have harmful code in it. So I trust where I'm getting this from. It's mine. And I'll go ahead and I'll run this. I see there's nothing in there. See if it'll let me go ahead and do what we did previously. Let's run this cell. And it did the same thing. Now, the things you need to note is that if you are accessing something that's in another repository, you have read-only access to it. Here it says you cannot save changes. But what you can do is you'll see in, I may add one in this module, but they're for sure in the next module, Module 2, notebooks for you to go through and work on. And in those notebooks, you'll see things that I may embed little videos for you to watch. You'll see snippets of code. You'll see descriptive text explaining what's taking place in that code. My lecture videos will actually walk through those notebooks, explaining what's going on in the notebook. Little nuances, ins and outs to why I did things, why we do things a certain way, how they work. I want you to go through each one of those notebooks on your own. You'll download a copy of it. And then once you've downloaded a copy, you can upload it to your Colab account. So right here, I can see it. Upload a notebook. All right, I'm going to choose a file. Let's go back. And in folders, COP1000. Let's go grab that one that we were playing with earlier. Now open it. Switch over to that current file that we had on my local machine. So essentially what I just did was I took a file from my local machine and I have now saved it into my Google Colab account. Now, where did it go? Well, it went into my my Google Drive. So if I say I want to open a notebook, see here's recent, that's a recent one. See that icon? That's where it is. So come over here. There's my file. It's in Google Drive. Now, the fact that it's in Google Drive and Colabs are kind of married together. So if you want to keep your stuff in GitHub, that's fine. You can do that. Just link your GitHub to Colab. If you want to keep it in Google Drive, that works too. In either case, you have a version that you can go work on and you can save. You see here, it's been saved. As I go work on it, let me see, I want to go create a new code cell. Print. This is a new cell. Will this run? Now it's having a problem running. And why is it having a problem running? It says print is not defined. And one of the things that you'll see in future modules in the course is that programming languages are very picky. They're very specific in how things are written. Changed it from a big P to a little p, and it worked fine. Now, we'll talk about what's implicit and explicit in programming later. But for now, that's the differences in how we save things in Google Colab or Google Drive, GitHub, your local drive with Jupyter Notebooks. So for this course, you don't need to install Jupyter Notebooks. You don't need to install Anaconda. You don't need to install Python on your local machine. You can do everything that I need you to do relative to your Jupyter Notebooks from Colab and storing your stuff in your Google Drive. You can also use GitHub if you want. I just want to expose you to all the different options available. Okay. I'll see you in the next lecture.